Conor McKeon, good morning to you.
Good morning, Owen.
So you've obviously seen those Paul Cody quotes, I imagine. The idea that Carlow are evidence of how lesser counties, or so-called lesser counties, can get forgotten in the world of hurling. The really sort of black and white nature of elitism showing its face in hurling. I'm not sure how much of it you agree with, how much he's banging the money about.
I think he's probably bang on the money. It's hard not to have sympathy for that tranche of counties that are somewhere in between, Liam McCarthy Cup level and Joe McDonagh Cup level. They can compete there. Like Carlow, it's a big cliche, but they have made serious strides in the last few years. But I think the problem with them is when you taste what they have tasted this year, which is Division 1B hurling and the Leinster Senior Hurling Championship, to go back into where they're going is such an anticlimax. Now you can argue that that's their level, and to have a competition you need to have relegation, you need to have promotion, and you need to have competitions where the veracity of the thing is you're punished for being relegated. Because like this time last year we were having the same conversation about Offaly, and you couldn't make any argument whatsoever at the moment that Offaly are good enough or deserve to be in the Leinster Senior Hurling Championship. But obviously Carlow seems to be going in a different direction. Like it's a tricky one. And it's the sort of thing that you would imagine Carlow will make. Like I was talking to somebody involved with a Joe McDonagh county yesterday who probably wouldn't want me to say, but he was saying that if they did end up going up any time in the next couple of years, there were something like 20 or 22 players who they'd asked out to play inter-county hurling that didn't commit this year. But if they did get promotion, they did play Liam McCarthy hurling, if they did play Leinster Championship hurling in the next couple of years, they would be able to get a huge number of those players back into the county panel. So it's very difficult. It is very difficult, and I don't know what the answer is, because you have 5 good counties in Munster and you have 4 very good counties in Leinster and a couple more on the fringes. So we have this conversation endlessly. It just goes round in circles. There is no perfect solution, and somebody always ends up losing out, and unfortunately in this case it's Carlow.
For sure. We've also got Jamesie O'Connor on the line this morning. Good morning to you, Jamesie.
Morning, one.
Just to finish up on this idea of elitism, like Brian Carroll actually kind of predicted this at the start of the year. Maybe it wasn't too much of a prediction, he could see it in front of him, but he says that the elite counties will get to a higher level and pull the ladder up behind them with the new structure. The thing is, we've been glorifying the new structure for the last 12, 15 months. It has been absolutely exceptional. How do you get that balance right?
Yeah, it's very, very hard. I suppose everyone envisaged that it would work out as it did, that Carlow would ultimately end up going down, and credit to them. Look at they were really competitive. Colin Bonner's done great work down there, but the gap exists, and you don't close that gap overnight. And every county, I think, you take Clare and Waterford, for example, this year. The serious probably introspection in both counties, and it's about, getting their own houses in order and making sure that they remain competitive. And, they really have enough to be worrying about themselves rather than worrying about, the Carlows, the Westmeads, the Laois. And there's just no quick fix to this. You have to build it from the bottom. I suppose, just make sure the resources are there in terms of, getting your school structure right, getting your primary school structure, in particular secondary schools, the supports are there, and just trying to build a solid foundation, and hoping then in time, that on the back of, decades of good work, that you gradually bridge that gap. But there's no quick fix to this. There's no short-term solution, and you have real sympathy for Carlow given the effort that they put in, and arguably we're going to be having the same conversation this time next year about somebody else.
Let's talk about the weekend's hurling. Tipperary against Limerick is the game of the weekend. It's 2:00 on Sunday afternoon, Jamesie. Is this going to be... first of all, actually, is this the two best teams in the country going head-to-head?
Arguably on what we've seen to date, yeah. The question is, though, potentially these counties could face each other 3 times, in a short space of time. That they could conceivably end up in facing each other in a Munster final, and then I think they're likely to face off at some point in the season in Croke Park. So, do they both want to show their hand? I think Limerick in particular would want to win the game. They've secured, their spot in the quarterfinals at least. But John Kidey, I think, has spoken about, obviously coming through in third last year, that they want to come through the front door. They want to probably win a Munster Championship, and I don't think there's any doubt about Limerick's approach at the weekend. Tip, it's a different matter because they're already through. Again, does Sheedy really want to show his hand? For the Tipperary players, I think it's in All Ireland. Those guys have a bag of Munster medals already. That's what matters to them. But at the same time, Tipper want to, I suppose, maintain the momentum that they have. I think they'll respect the integrity of the competition. There's no issue that they'll go out to tank it or anything like that. But it may be an opportunity for Sheedy to start some of those younger players, those 21s, get 70 minutes championship game momentum, be a bit wiser about what depth he actually has. But Tip and Thurles aren't going to roll over, and that's what makes it. Maybe not the game of the weekend, because I think that's in Wexford Park with Kilkenny and Wexford, but certainly, on form as you alluded to earlier on, the two best teams in the country to date.
Yeah, the idea of showing one's hand is an interesting one, because ultimately we've seen so much of Tip already this year. It's the nature of the new format that we see a lot of each county, that you can't really hold a lot, James. You can't hold a lot but under the table. Limerick will know how Tipperary will approach this game if it was a Munster final, if it was an All-Ireland semi-final or final. So really, the opportunity for experimentation comes in the personnel.
I think so, yeah. And, why wouldn't? I mean, Liam Sheehy knows what, Seamus Callanan and John McGrath and Nolan McGrath and Bubbles are capable of. Does he know what some of the other players, are? I mean, is Willie Connors, for example, capable of surviving for 70 minutes? I mean, Jake Morris got game time last year, but some of the other players, Robert Byrne and so on, I think, he's likely to throw in, 3 or 4 of those guys into the mix. I mean, the other side of it is, maybe he wants to see his defence under pressure, because, they've really coped, relatively easily to date with what Waterford, Clare and Cork have thrown at them. So, yeah, it's really interesting, because, as I said, this was never an issue in the past. But do you want to potentially face a team in a really big game in Croke Park down the line and give them ammunition, or show them what you have? And I think arguably you don't. Now, listen, you could say that's all bunkum anyway. That it's championship hurling, and you have to play what's in front of you. But I don't see Tipperary tanking, but I think Limerick's need to win is greater, and I think they'll go to Thurles. I think they'll get a result on there.
Conor, would you go along with that?
I think so, yeah. I don't think Tipperary are, for all their really good form so far and all their sparkling hurling, particularly in attack, I don't think they're sort of, robust enough as an outfit to just kind of tank this game and then all of a sudden pick it up for a Munster final. So I think they'll have to go and perform, but I'd agree with Jamesie about the need to see guys like Jake Morris, I suppose the remarkable thing about Tip's resurgence this summer is that it's all the same players who weren't resurgent last year. But what happens if one of them goes? What happens if you're missing Bubbles for a Munster final, or you're missing Jamie Callan for an All-Ireland semi-final? Then you need to know what Jake Morris is going to be able to do. Then you need to and probably the one thing, not criticism, but the one worry you might have about Tipperary is that what they have on the bench definitely isn't as strong as what they have in the forwards, and I think they need to cultivate that, and they after this game they won't get another chance. So I wouldn't be surprised if there were a couple of changes to the Tipperary team, but ultimately that they went out to win the game, as Jamesie says.
What is, in your view, the team at the best level of depth, Conor? Because obviously I think when you look at that Tipperary forward line, it is outrageously talented, but then, as you say, when it comes to players coming off the bench, there are a lot of unknowns. It does seem that you could say that about a lot of counties, though. Are Tip out on their own there?
No, not necessarily. You wouldn't have any. Kilkenny obviously don't have the bench that they had in the past. Galway don't have the bench that they have in the past. Cork are kind of strange, because they can pick a fella who was playing club football the previous week and then throw him in at centre back, and all of a sudden he looks like the best centre back in the country. Limerick are the team with the depth. There's no doubt about that. We were saying that as far back as March when they beat Kilkenny and Nolan Park in the league, and Barry Murphy and Jamie Flanagan and all these players, and Tom Condon, and players who were kind of on the periphery, on the fringes, stepped straight into the team and produced a huge display. So yeah, Limerick are the team with the depth, but your depth is great. There's no doubt about that. And last year in the All-Ireland semi-final, the game that went extra time between Limerick and Cork, there was a huge disparity in the depth. I think John Myler ended up bringing back on a couple of players that he'd already taken off, and Limerick's bench contributed. I can't remember the figure, but it was something like 1-5 more than Cork's was. But in a situation like that, your bench will tell. But to this point, it hasn't affected Tipperary whatsoever. If your 6 forwards they're 6 forwards and they're going to be fit to play the vast majority of your 70 minutes, you're not going to have too many quibbles about your bench.
Jamesie, before we get into the game of the weekend, as you dubbed Wexford Kilkenny, we should talk Clare Cork. There's obviously still an opportunity, a small one, for Clare to progress in the Munster Championship, but how poisonous has the last week been in Clare in terms of what's been written, in terms of what has been spoken about this team?
Yeah, there's been some I suppose pretty sharp commentary I suppose particularly against the management, and obviously Dawn Maloney and Jerry O'Connor have a huge, brilliant track record at underage, and obviously we were puck of a ball away from being in the final last year, but it's gone south, and I think a lot of hurling people appreciate that. Listen, this was something that no one saw coming. I mean, we went to Waterford obviously and got a result, and that form stands up now. We only won by a point in the end, but nobody predicted this. Nobody saw this coming, and that's what makes it so bitter disappointing. And you really feel for the management team and the players as well, because it's not like they're a bunch of messers or that they've been out drinking or anything like that. I mean, these guys are dedicated, they're motivated, they're putting a massive effort, but for whatever reason, it's just gone wrong. We've key players that were massively important for us last year. John Conlon was inspirational last year. Peter Duggan in great form. Shane O'Donnell, we saw him at his best. And these guys just have no form at exactly the wrong time, and no time was given. We're into our third game now in 3 weeks to find it or to really turn it around. So it's been a really, I'd say, tough week for the management and players. A lot of soul searching, and they have a really, really difficult job to try to pick themselves up for the weekend. Now you'd hope they look at there's a kick in them, and certainly nobody's inflicted more pain on this bunch of players than Cork, given the Munster finals in the last 2 years, and especially last year, given the position we were in heading into half time. It looked like we'd one hand on the trophy, so there'd be no shortage of motivation. And like, if Limerick do go to Thurles and win, which I think they very well might, well then we're suddenly through. The question is there any desire or belief in the squad that, look, if we did get through, are we capable of living with the Tipperaries or with the Limericks again down the line? And that's for me the big question. Now, you would have 5 weeks, whatever. Limerick obviously were able to bounce back last year after the loss in Ennis, but it's very, very hard to see Clare winning on Sunday, because Cork have really managed to turn it around after the loss, to Tip, and Cork were impressive, and you spoke about depth in the last question on Cork have found it. I mean, you can bring on Conor Lahan off the bench, and you can bring on Shane Kingston off the bench, and Steve McDonald is a quality player. Colin Blanche has come back into the mix, and Cork suddenly looked at as much depth as as anybody. Obviously, Alan Cadigan as well is a massive throw in to have back, and his pace, and he's in good form. So I just can't see Clare, much in all as I'd love to bounce them back at the weekend. And I think if we're not right, I mean, we could be on the back of another 10 to 15 point beating if we're feeling sorry for ourselves, and that's the danger and the worry for Clare supporters, I think. But
Jamesie, where's that desire gone? I was just thinking, you alluded there to Clare getting to the All-Ireland semi-final last year, going to a replay within a puck of a ball of an All-Ireland against a Galway that were really robust, and surprised by the strength of Clare, because we were all saying last year, Galway are going to beat Clare up. They didn't. Clare had a decent enough league. Okay, now we can look at the Waterford game and say, yeah, maybe, Waterford were in no great shakes to begin with. But I was at that Waterford-Clare game at Walsh Park, and there was a great feeling amongst the Clare camp afterwards. I was getting interviews, and you could just tell they felt good with each other. You could just get a positive vibe. So where's it gone?
Yeah, I really don't know, and I don't think anybody knows. I mean, I don't think anybody saw this coming. As you said, there was a real optimism, that we did go down to Walsh Park and we did get the results. And as I said, it's baffling, but it's just because guys just don't have form, and it's as if the conference has evaporated out of it. Now, I always felt that Limerick, last weekend, potentially was payback, because we'd beaten them in the last 3 years in the championship. Clare Limerick brings its own rivalry. There were plenty of Clare supporters sending pictures of the result in Ennis to Limerick people after the All-Ireland as well, and that's its own dynamic. And it was hot and heavy during the league, and Limerick came to Ennis and ended up only getting a draw, and so I felt that was always going to be a dangerous game, but we just don't seem to have any confidence whatsoever. And when that goes, it's very, very hard to get it back. And as I said, you hope that there's a kick in this team, and that they're certainly better than what they've shown, and there'll be a real desire. Look at an Ennis, given, as I said, what Cork have visited on us in the last couple of seasons, that listen, we're not going to roll over, and we're not going to subject ourselves to another hammering. We owe it to ourselves, we owe it to the supporters, we owe it to the management. But there is just, I think, that sense that the season is effectively over, and we're just a mile off where it's at the moment. And I just hope that that's not the case, that we do deliver a performance at least, and if we do, well, then sport is funny, and who knows, I mean, there could be a twist or turn in this before the weekend is over, but I just don't see it.
You'd worry that the players perhaps are being infected by this talk, because perhaps if they were nicely insulated away from it all, that they could say, have a regroup, control, alt, delete, turn the page, focus on the Cork game, because like you said, Cork have inflicted so much damage on Clare over the years, but Clare have 2013 in their back pocket as well against Cork. But is there any way that, you'd know this yourself obviously, is there any way that a player can be that insulated away from that kind of chatter in the background and knowing in their own hearts that they just didn't perform over the last few weeks, and if your own confidence is taking a hit, is there anything you can do in a week to try and fix that?
Well, I think, look, you're playing for pride, and the darkest hour is the one before the dawn. And sometimes, maybe, I think we all need someone sometimes to tell us maybe what we don't necessarily want to hear. And and one of the questions I think that needs to be asked is, are the players and management being hard enough on each other? Is our players calling each other out maybe, or saying, look, are we working hard enough? Are we throwing in the towel? Are we fighting, as hard as we could have? And again, like Tony Kelly, for example, is a guy who really needs to stand up now. John Conlon needs to Shane O'Donnell needs to stand up, and there needs to be some talking. And maybe it's the forward saying, listen, look, at the tactics are wrong. We're not isolating O'Donnell, for example, inside, giving him an opportunity maybe to take someone on one-on-one. We're not getting the ball in, but there needs to be some hard questions asked as to where exactly is it going wrong, and what do we need to do to address it. Do we need to start with a sweeper, for example, and just keep things tight at the back early on and keep ourselves in the game? But I just hope that some of those questions have been asked during the week, and I hope that players are maybe calling each other out. And certainly in my team, back in the 90s, Lognan was very quick to tell you sometimes what you didn't want to hear, and very quick to cut you with the knees when you're maybe getting ahead of yourself. And listen, if I wasn't working hard enough, Seanie McMahon or Brian Lohan or Anthony Daly or somebody else, wouldn't be slow to let me know about it. And I think that dynamic, I think, is important in all good teams. And you just sense at the moment in Clare that maybe it's a little bit too cosy. And sometimes it just gets that way, and it's nobody's fault. But I think, look, there will have been some straight talking done in the camp during the week, and maybe they need to freshen up and maybe throw in a couple of guys and make a few changes, and maybe that might be the catalyst. But I just think, as I said, Cork, are coming off the back now of two really good wins. Their tails are up. It's a complete 360 for them, from where they were coming out of Páirc Uí Chaoimh after the tip loss. And as I said, I just don't see, where we can suddenly summon, the form, the confidence, and the look at the firepower, because with 16 shots on goal, I think, against Limerick, at a time when it's taken 30 points to win matches, and most teams are having 40 shots at goal, and I just can't see, a way for us to get a result at the weekend. I said, I just hope we get a performance, and I just hope we get a bit of pride back. But I think Cork have been really impressed with them in the last two games, and I think Milo has so much competition for places down there that they'll come to us to do another job and look after their business and get to a Munster final. And that's bad news for us.
Conor, let's set the scene in Leinster this weekend. So you've got Wexford against Kilkenny at Innovate Wexford Park, and Dublin against Galway at Parnell Park, both throwing in at 7 o'clock tomorrow evening. It's going to be a cracking hour and a half of hurling, you'd imagine, with both games throwing in at the same time. What are the permutations here? Everybody's got a chance, basically, and what way are you looking at it?
Everyone's got a chance, and I think it's a great thing that the two games are thrown in at the same time, so nobody knows for certain what happened. Like, even Galway are in a situation where they're almost certainly through, but they have a situation where if they lose to Dublin and Parnell Park and the other game finishes in a draw, they're actually out of the equation completely. So that means that Galway can't come. There's been all this talk the last couple of weeks that Joe Canning could be rushed back to play some part in that match because, obviously he is who he is, and Galway have had problems on frees. And I think if that was the plan all along, I'm not sure that Micheál Donoghue would have changed that plan now, because, Wexford and Kilkenny drawing isn't beyond the realms of possibility, and you'd hate to be in a situation where you didn't take every available precaution going to Parnell Park to win that game. And the game, I know everyone's very excited about the game at Wexford Park, and rightfully so, but the game at Parnell Park is huge as well. There's a proper rivalry between Dublin and Galway. There has been for a while, stretching back, I think, to the 2011 Leinster Championship. And Parnell Park is one of those places that, and it's a cliche, but it's a cliche because it's true. I've yet to meet a single hurler from any county other than Dublin that likes to play in Parnell Park. It's tight and it's claustrophobic, and Dublin tend to hurl well there, and it'll be a war. The two teams are very, very physical, and I think a lot will come down to Cathal McAllister. But on the other side on the flip side of things, in Wexford Park, for whatever reason, the way Wexford play hurling has caused Kilkenny a lot of problems since Davy Fitzgerald has arrived there. I think they played 9 times, and 5 times Kilkenny haven't scored a goal. And I saw another stat doing the rounds in the last couple of days that no team that has scored fewer goals in a match in this year's provincial hurling championships has actually gone on to win the game. So, you know, it's crazy, and you wonder whether TJ can keep up his absolutely ridiculous performances so far. I looked it up this morning, and he's responsible for the highest individual tally of any player in a match, the second highest individual tally of a player in any match, and the third highest individual tally of a player in any match. And while everyone's sitting around saying, "Well, look, you can't rely on him," like, why not? Like,
you kind of can, yeah.
If he's going to score 210, 211, 212, that's the sort of thing. That's the sort of thing. If you felt he was going to do it again, you're not exactly going to tell your defenders to spread the ball around a little bit more when they're playing it up front. Yeah,
Philip Lanigan did a good piece in the Irish Daily Mail this week comparing TJ and Henry Shefflin. I'm wondering if you put TJ into Henry's position with not arguably, definitely better forwards around him during the Pete Cody era, would you have a better forward? Would he be revered in the same way that Shefflin is? He compared him to Maradona in '86, his comparisons or his performances in this year's championship, dragging Kilkenny through the championship rounds. I'm not sure what you make of that. Is that a bit over the top to compare him to Henry Shefflin, or to put him above Henry Shefflin?
It would be over the top to compare him to Diego Maradona, but other than that, I don't see that's quite a problem. Like, no, it's fair enough. Like, I mean, like, it's not that it's chalk and cheese, but you have, like, when Henry was starting off, like, he had Charlie Carter and DJ Carey there, and when he was finished, like, you know, in his pomp, he had Eddie Brennan and Martin Comerford alongside him, and when he was finishing up, he had Richie Hogan and Colin Fennelly and TJ himself there too. So I don't think Henry ever had to really carry Kilkenny as such, but like, that's not to diminish like what it was an incredible career. Like, and it nearly suits TJ, this kind of Ryder Rovers role too, because like, he's so physically strong, he can win his own ball. Opposition know the ball is going to him, and the way that he generates goal chances for himself, like I haven't seen any forward lately do that. You know, from situations where it's just not on, he'll play just the right pass, make just the right run, break just the right tackle to open it up, and his finishing is superb. So, like, I don't know. I'd be loath to say that one is better than the other, but you know, they'd make a good 11 and good 14 if they were both at their peak in the same Kilkenny team. Yeah,
it wouldn't be bad. Jamesy, that's the thing, isn't it? The creating of chances by TJ Reid and the finishing of the chances as well. I guess that's the comparison with Maradona here. Maradona used to dribble past everybody. He used to create the chance and finish the chance. TJ Reid is doing something similar, and maybe the comparison isn't as far away as some people might think.
No, I mean, he's phenomenal, and I mean, you know, just as Conor said, the timing of his runs, just his sense of anticipation, you know, just his ability to, you know, the ball might break me, and he's just suddenly got a step on the defender, and, you know, he's been so clinical when he's got into those positions. And, like, obviously, stopping Kilkenny starts with stopping TJ, and, you know, the last time that Wexford beat him in Wexford Park a couple of years ago, they absolutely put the shackles on him, and, you know, he was very, very tightly man-marked and niggled and hassled, and, you know, and Davy will have a plan. Look at, you know, Matt Hanlon will pick up Walter Walsh and leave somebody else to try to mark TJ, and that has to be the concern for Kilkenny. Like, that if TJ is held, and, you know, if his contribution, you know, is negated, you know, is there somebody else capable of stepping up and you know, taking on the mantle? Now, Colin Fennelly was the guy a couple of years ago that was virtually unstoppable and caused Liam Ryan all kinds of problems. But it's a really, really treacherous game for Kilkenny, because, you know, I still think Galway will get the job done in Purnell Park, because they can't afford not to, because, as Conor said, like, a draw is not beyond the bounds of possibility. And, you know, it's unthinkable that Galway, you know, might take their eye off the ball, and suddenly circumstances contrive to put them out. So I think that they'll just, you know, especially given the positivity that they took away from Nolan Park last weekend, they're still good enough to get the job done over there. But, like, we all thought the drama was going to be in Munster. It's absolutely in Leinster, and it's you know, there are two games that, you know, conceivably anything could happen. Galway could be out, Kilkenny could be out, you know, who knows? But it's all the drama is going to be in Dublin on Wexford Park on Saturday night. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's been unbelievable. Like, the end of that Galway-Wexford game was edge of the seat stuff. It was unbelievable, even though the 60 minutes before that was a little bit disappointing. And obviously last week, Galway against Kilkenny was just a sensational task. Like, there is questions over Joe Canning, whether or not you start him, whether or not you don't. But there is no question here that we have seen a level of bounce back from Galway over the last couple of weeks, Jamesie, which a lot of people reckoned wouldn't be there.
Yeah, and I was in Salt Hill, and they really were terrible again. I mean, Wexford should have won the game. There's no question about that. I mean, Carl Dunbar had a gilt-edged opportunity that, you know, he really should have buried. And Lee Chin had a chance after that, even at the death, that you know, and was only 50%, I think, from freeze on the day. And okay, conditions were really, really difficult, but you know, Galway were absolutely, you know, steeped and looked to get a draw. Now, credit to them for hanging in there, because with 10 minutes to go, it looked like, you know, Wexford had the winning of the match. I think they were level, and they're playing with a storm, and Galway just you know, didn't seem to be you know what they were at, or what way they were trying to play. And you know, I think they went on a training weekend to Carton House the week before the Kilkenny game, and obviously you know, really got a lot of positives out of it. And you know, I mean, just look at the Gordon Nolan Park. We all know how difficult that is. That nobody won down there in 70 years. That's a massive, you know, win for them. And suddenly, it's again, no more than Cork. It's a huge turnaround, because you know that they're fates in their own hands now. They've got, I think, a lot of confidence back, a lot of belief back in themselves. Kenny obviously has got to come back into it. And suddenly, you know, Galway are really in the mix, along with Tip, Limerick, you know, Cork, as potential winners. But you know, from a Wexford perspective, like, they probably should have won the game in Galway, and you know, it's still Kilkenny. And even in Nolan Park last year, you know, Wexford very much at the winning of that game, and Kilkenny found a way to get it done. But Wexford have had, you know, the wherewithal to beat Kilkenny, as Conor said early on. Like, you know, they've done it 4 or 5 times. You know, in the last 3 years since Davy took over, and they did it in Wexford Park 2 years ago, and it's a difficult place to go, and Wexford are very, very difficult to play against.
Yeah, they had the wherewithal to beat Galway. It's just their own inaccuracy knocked them out of it, basically, with the free taking and because I was in Galway as well. It was a woeful game, and Galway came out of there by the skin of their teeth with that draw. I'd be wondering though, will that inaccuracy be a factor again? Are they going to be crying tomorrow night about, you know, that little bit of inaccuracy that you can't, in general, you're not forgiven against any team. They were just lucky that day against Galway, who just weren't firing on any cylinder. Will they have that same kind of inaccuracy tomorrow night? Do they have enough time to fix that?
I think they do, yeah. I mean, one of the things, Marshall, I was on the pitch after the game, and it's only when you're actually down there you realise the strength of the breeze. And you know, I watched it back during the week, and some of the chances that guys missed. You know, Leachin missed a couple of frees that, like, he'd normally put over in his sleep, but you can't afford to be 50% or 60% or 70% on the frees, because TJ will be 90% plus at the other side of it. And I think I described, you know, some of those misses certainly to the conditions. But what did impress me was, you know, Liam McGovern had a couple of horrendous wides early on, but, you know, wasn't afraid. He got a fantastic point at a crucial stage midway through the second half in the middle of the field, where, you know, he didn't bottle it. He took the shot on. Rory O'Connor again, who, you know, didn't maybe have his best game, spent a lot of time maybe foraging deep, again got a couple of really important scores late on. Jack O'Connor at one end of the field got an unbelievable hook in on Conor Cooney, where he, you know, really made up massive ground, and then was at the other end of the field a couple minutes later laying off the ball to Dunbar for that chance. So Wexford, like, they're hard to play against, and I think, you know, David Dunn, Cathal Dunbar, I think these guys are good players. McGovern obviously is fit, you know, back after obviously the crucial injuries that he's had. And I think if Wexford just trust themselves and believe in themselves, on paper they have as much, if not more, firepower than Kilkenny. And I think they just got to be a bit bolder maybe, and maybe be less defensive. And trust maybe that they can contain that Kilkenny attack, particularly if they put the shackles on TJ, and just go for the other end of the field. But Kilkenny are Kilkenny, and it's back to the wall stuff, and there's only one way that they'll know in those circumstances, and it's absolute dog it out stuff, and no one, you know, is better equipped to put up with hardship and physicality. And if that's the type of game that Kilkenny have to win, well, look at this grist to their mill, and you know, Cody will relish going into the Wexford's backyard and turning him over. And as I said, it's a really, really tight game to call, and draw is not beyond the bounds of possibility.
Yeah, absolutely not. Jamesie O'Connor, thanks a million for taking the call.
Cheers, Owen.
Conor, just one last thing before we let you go briefly. Just, you mentioned the Dublin-Galway relationship there. A bit of a rivalry has built up over the years. Kind of borderline needle, I think it's fair to say, just from being on the beat with Dublin over the last few years and stuff. What is exactly that needle based on? Why has there been such a rivalry building up between these teams?
Well, I spoke to a couple of players, and I think the 2011 game was kind of a watermark for them. It was the first time that Dublin had really beaten the team in the championship that were considered a team above them in the kind of pecking order. And Galway didn't like it very much, and there's been a bit of needle. I think a lot of protagonists from those games, from the kind of rivalry, are gone now at this stage, but it has carried over. And it has carried over into some really, really big match between the two teams. But like, they're both physical teams. They both kind of flood the middle. They both kind of make the game into a bit of a war. And there was that row in Fenway Park in Boston as well, which was every bit as serious, I think, as it looked on television at the time as well. So
what happened there again? Just remind us.
I can't remember. Like, it basically just turned into a mill. Like, it was the sort of thing where a foul. I think 2 players got sent off. I think it was James Skettle and maybe Conor Dooley, the Dublin reserve goalkeeper. So, yeah, like, it's been pretty bitter and it's been pretty tight. But I suppose the point of it is that, like, Dublin are the sort of team that will believe they can beat Galway in Parnell Park, because they have the physicality, they have the players that can make that thing into a war. And if you look at the real pillars of the Galway team, Grove McInerney, P. Burke, Pádraig Mannion, like, Dublin are probably, I don't know whether Liam Rush is fit, but they'll probably go straight with Conal Keaney and Grove McInerney, Liam Rush onto Daithí Burke, Danny Sutcliffe onto Pádraig Mannion, and back themselves to win those duels. And the same thing, like Chris Crummey, you know, I think one of the most underrated halfbacks, one of the most underrated hurlers in the country. He is probably the only player physical enough in the Dublin team to go on Johnny Glenn. We're still waiting to hear the result of Shane Barrett's hearing last night, but if he's fit, I think he'll go on Cathal Mannion. And Owen O'Donnell, who's been without a doubt the outstanding fullback in the country, will probably play on Conor Whelan. And it really is one of those games where if you win 4 of those 6 matchups, you could win the game. And like, Dublin have been building towards a performance. Like, they've had flourishes of really good hurling against Kilkenny, really good hurling against Wexford. But the problem has been, when the thing has gone wrong for them, they've kind of compounded their mistake. And, you know, after conceding a goal, they've lost the next 3 or 4 puckouts and given themselves too much to do, or almost too much to do, in the case of the Wexford game. But, you know, like, there's probably a sense in Dublin that after 2 years of getting really close to making that big victory for this team, to kind of just getting over the line, that it has to come, you know. And like, given the situation that they were faced with against Wexford, where they were 3 points down in the 5th minute of injury time of the second half, if you'd have told them then they'd have a home game where if they won it on the last day they'd be into a Leinster final, they'd have taken your hand off. So I think they're going into it probably in a better frame of mind than a lot of people maybe think.
Yeah, I think so too. Conor McKeon, appreciate taking the call. Thanks for that.
Thanks, Owen. Thanks, Mark.
Conor McKeon there of I&M, of the Irish Independent and the Herald, on the line.